What about Julian Assange? What's your relationship with him?
So what Julian Assange is doing, he's putting a spotlight on all these secrets.
How often do you talk to him?
Why is that important to you?
I'm curious.
Look, I like these guys, you know. I look up to them. I think they are very brave. They're going through a very hard time, you know, and they chose to do that for the betterment of all of us. So, yeah, I love to talk to them.
So, you said you were going to bring the internet party to the U.S. in 2016.
Yeah.
Why? What's your goal?
Well, because I think there's a big group of people out there that disagree with what's going on, you know. They want to have their privacy back. They want to have internet freedom.
You tweeted that you were going to be Hillary's worst nightmare in 2016. How so?
Well, I have to say it's probably more Julian. But I'm aware of some of the things that are going to be roadblocks for her. So, you know, if I can provide some transparency with these people and make them part of what the Internet Party stands for, then, you know, I will be happy to do that.
You're saying Julian Assange is going to be Hillary's worst nightmare in 2016.
I think so, yeah.
How so?
Well, he has access to information.
The attack happened here early Sunday morning in the 5th District at the intersection of West Street and Flagler. 27-year-old Seth Rich, seen here in his LinkedIn profile picture, murdered as he walked in a neighborhood he called home in Northwest D.C. Seth just lives a couple blocks away from here, but this is where police found him, right over there, lying on the ground in the intersection. He was still alive, but he had multiple gunshot wounds to his back. Seth worked here at the headquarters of the DNC. He was the director of voter expansion since 2014. DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman-Schultz tells me our hearts are broken. Seth was a dedicated, selfless public servant who worked tirelessly to protect the most sacred rights we share as Americans, the right to vote. This is the first murderer in this neighborhood this year. Stephen Matthews, whose family has lived here for the past 60 years, tells me he can't remember the last time he heard gunshots.
I heard 2 gunshots the other night. You know, I knew it was gunshots, but
Was it like bam bam or?
yeah, it was in quick succession.
Police just confirming 2 armed robberies occurred in the last few weeks in this same neighborhood. One of those robberies involved a gun, and now maybe a third that quickly turned violent in what most think is a quiet and safe neighborhood. So somebody getting murdered here is just really strange.
Yeah, it kind of throws you back, makes you think a little bit, you know.
For that, we want to begin tonight with the people of Flint themselves. This is Mickey Wade. She's a public housing program manager and the mother of 2 kids. She says she's currently undecided and has a question that both of you will be able to weigh in on. Ms. Wade?
The water has impacted our lives in such a way that living comfortably in our home isn't the same anymore. the constant drives to pick up water just so my children can wash their hair, to wash our fruits and vegetables, and to brush our teeth is incredibly difficult. Once the pipes are replaced, I'm not for sure if I will be comfortable ever drinking the water. If elected president, what course will you take to regain my trust in the government?
Secretary Clinton, we'll begin with you.
2 weeks ago, DHS Secretary Jay Johnson and I released a joint statement saying that the recent compromises of emails are directed by the Russian government. And the emails released on sites like DCLeaks.com and Wikileaks and by the Guccifer 2 online persona are consistent with the methods and motivations of Russian-directed efforts. And going after U.S. political organizations is a new aggressive spin on the political cycle.
You are very clearly quoting from WikiLeaks, and what's really important about WikiLeaks is that the Russian government has engaged in espionage against Americans. They have hacked American websites, American accounts of private people, of institutions. Then they have given that information to WikiLeaks for the purpose of putting it on the internet. This has come from the highest levels of the Russian government, clearly from Putin himself, in an effort, as 17 of our intelligence agencies have confirmed, to influence our election.
Can you at least characterize the sort of intelligence that's coming in that proves that this was a Russian hack? Is it digital fingerprints that you're tracing back to a computer in Russian possession? Is it human sourcing that you're intercepting phone calls and hearing Russians talk about this kind of thing? Yeah. Or where's the confidence coming from?
The statement that was issued by the intelligence community in October of 2016, before the election, making clear that Russia was interfering in our election, represented the consensus view of 17 different intelligence agencies. That's not usually the way intelligence works.
If we had known the intelligence was wrong, we would not have gone into Iraq. But the intelligence community, all 16 agencies, assured us that it was right. My speech at the UN was based on that information.
Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction. My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii.
What are some of the positions that you held previously within the intelligence community?
I've been a systems engineer, systems administrator, senior advisor for the Central Intelligence Agency, solutions consultant, and a telecommunications information systems officer.
One of the things people are going to be most interested in trying to understand who you are and what you're thinking is there came some point in time when you crossed this line of thinking about being a whistleblower to making the choice to actually become a whistleblower. Walk people through that decision-making process.
When you're in positions of privileged access, like a systems administrator for these sort of intelligence community agencies, you're exposed to a lot more information on a broader scale than the average employee. And because of that, you see things that may be disturbing, but over the course of a normal person's career, you'd only see one or two of these instances. When you see everything, you see them on a more frequent basis. And you recognize that some of these things are actually abuses. And when you talk to people about them, in a place like this where this is the normal state of business, people tend not to take them very seriously and move on from them. But over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up, and you feel compelled to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you're ignored, the more you're told it's not a problem, until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who is simply hired by the government.
Talk a little bit about how the American surveillance state actually functions. Does it target the actions of Americans?
NSA and the intelligence community in general is focused on getting intelligence wherever it can by any means possible that it believes on the grounds of sort of a self-certification that they serve the national interest. Originally, we saw that focus very narrowly tailored as foreign intelligence gathered overseas. Now, increasingly, we see that it's happening domestically. And to do that, the NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them for periods of time, simply because that's the easiest, most efficient, and most valuable way to achieve these ends. So while they may be intending to target someone associated with a foreign government or someone that they suspect of terrorism, they're collecting your communications to do so. Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector, anywhere. Where those communications will be picked up depends on the range of the sensor networks and the authorities that that analyst is empowered with. Not all analysts have the ability to target everything, but I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email. I think that the public is owed an explanation of the motivations behind the people who make these disclosures that are outside of the democratic model. When you are subverting the power of government, that's a fundamentally dangerous thing to democracy. And if you do that in secret consistently, as the government does when it wants to benefit from a secret action that it took, it'll kind of give its officials a mandate to go, hey, tell the press about this thing and that thing, so the public is on our side. But they rarely, if ever, do that when an abuse occurs. That falls to individual citizens, but they're typically maligned. It becomes a thing of these people are against the country, they're against the government. But I'm not. I'm no different from anybody else. I don't have special skills. I'm just another guy who sits there day to day in the office, watches what's happening, and goes, this is something that's not our place to decide. The public needs to decide whether these programs and policies are right or wrong. And I'm willing to go on the record to defend the authenticity of them and say, I didn't change these. I didn't modify the story. This is the truth. This is what's happening. You should decide whether we need to be doing this.
I was referring to the cyber reconnaissance that we had observed. Many states had state entities had observed prior to the statement, and that sort of activity seemed to have curtailed. As far as the WikiLeaks connection, the evidence there is not as strong, and we don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided. We don't have as good insight into that.
Tonight we have a short opening monologue. Now, Democrats, they continue to make the claim that the Russian government is directly tied to the 2016 election hacking. And with weeks to go before he leaves office, well, President Obama announced sanctions against Russia, and also the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. They released a coinciding report supposedly containing evidence that the Russian government coordinated all these cyber attacks. But that report gives very few details and a massive, big disclaimer. Now, Democrats are also pointing a finger at the group Wikileaks, claiming that Russian hackers provided them with thousands of emails from the DNC and from Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta. Now, these emails contained explosive details exposing corruption, media collusion with the Clinton campaign, and downright dirty politics all the way around. So in light of all these new developments, well, I decided to go straight to the source over this ongoing controversy. So yesterday, I traveled to London to sit down with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange in an attempt to set the record straight. Let me start with the American elections. And from your perspective, how big a role do you feel WikiLeaks had in the outcome of the election? You didn't think Donald Trump was going to win.
I didn't think Donald Trump would win. I thought the establishment, for want of a better word, would see Hillary Clinton losing and then would pile in more money and more energy, and various TV networks are on her side, and make sure that she won. I think that analysis was still correct, but it missed something fundamental, which is that the amount of investment to the Hillary Clinton campaign was in proportion to the degree that the establishment thought that she would lose. And she was aggressively projecting that she would be the inevitable winner, and was above, 5-10 points in the opinion polling. So she only got $1.5 billion directed into her campaign. If they thought she was going to lose, maybe she would have gotten $5 billion. We'd see a different result.
It's very interesting post-election, and it didn't even really happen immediately, but the narrative has begun that, in fact, the U.S. government is accusing WikiLeaks of having received materials from Russia and Russia's cyber criminals with the political agenda of influencing the election. And obviously they're talking not just about the John Podesta emails, the DNC emails, but in other ways. I've asked you before, I'll ask you again today. Did Russia give you this information, or anybody associated with Russia?
Our source is not a state party. So the answer for our interactions is no. But if we look at the most recent statement by the US government, which is on the 29th of December, okay, we had 5 different branches of government, Treasury, DHS, FBI, White House, presenting their accusations to underpin Obama's throwing out 35 Russian diplomats. What was missing from all of those statements? The word WikiLeaks. It's very strange. Now, my interpretation is that there's either, not surprisingly, a problem they feel with the evidence as far as WikiLeaks is concerned. Well, James Clapper said, we don't know how WikiLeaks got this information, we don't know when WikiLeaks got this information. But let's imagine that they are saying, okay, the problem here is that WikiLeaks published information. Well, what are they saying? WikiLeaks published true information that the American public read. That information was the words of Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, and other people in her campaign. And the American public read that information, true information, and said, we don't like these people. and then voted accordingly.
The main focus for most Americans, they are being told by Hillary Clinton's campaign, by the President of the United States, there are the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, etc., that in fact WikiLeaks was working with the Russian government to influence the election. Is that true in any way, shape, matter, or form?
No, that's absolutely false. And if you read their statements carefully, you'll see they don't actually say that. They kind of mention one fact here and one fact there and nothing else. In the most up-to-date information, on the 29th of December, where the FBI, DHS, White House, etc. made a statement, what is completely absent from all those statements is WikiLeaks. Totally absent. So what's going on? Well, I believe two things are going on. Number one, they don't have the evidence.
Can you say to the American people unequivocally that you did not get this information about the DNC, John Podesta's emails? Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia or
Yes.
anybody associated with Russia?
We can say, we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months that our source is not the Russian government and it is not a state party.
There was one report in the Daily Mail that suggested somebody that you are friendly with actually was handed the documents at American University in a wooded area by a disgruntled Democrat who felt betrayed because the revelation showed that Bernie Sanders had been betrayed and they didn't like the corruption of the Clinton Foundation. Can you confirm or deny that? Is that story true?
Well, that statement came from Craig Murray. He
friend of yours?
Friend of mine. He's been here several times. But WikiLeaks is a source protection organization. We are famous for never having exposed one of our sources over 10 years. That's why sources trust us and they come to us. So I can't comment on other people's statements about our sources, except to say what we have said, which is that our sources are not a state party. The true statements of Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, and the DNC head, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, their true statements is what changed the election. Can you just imagine that if WikiLeaks had information about Debbie Wasserman-Schultz helping to rig the primary with Bernie Sanders, and we withheld that information until after the election? That would be an absolutely unconscionable act for a media organization to engage in. Unfortunately, those sorts of acts do happen, but not with this organization. They're trying to delegitimize Trump administration as it goes into the White House. They are trying to say that President-elect Trump is not a legitimate president.
Legitimately elected president.
Not a legitimately elected.
If your information...
you watch, they will seize on this and harp on it for the next 4 years. I think that's a mistake. I think that's a mistake not just in fact, that's a mistake for the US Democratic Party. I think it's a stupid maneuver. It's the same reason why they lost the election, which is instead of focusing on substance, they focus on other things which they think are short-term wins, but are not strategic. A little comment by Trump here and there, for example, or this attempt to say that how outrageous it is that the American public receive true information before an election. That the public doesn't buy that. They want as much true information as possible.
If the information you had was about Donald Trump and his campaign, would you have equally released that?
Yes, absolutely. It would be, once again, just think about it from our perspective. We've won a lot of media awards. We have the trust of our sources. We have the trust of our readers, having never got it wrong.
Well, this is an important point. 10 years, not one evidence where you've been proven wrong.
Well, not even one sustained allegation, even. We have a perfect record in relation to authenticating the material that we publish. That's a very valuable reputation to have, and we try and preserve it. So what else do we have a record for? There's no sources coming out through other journalists, say for example, they can still keep their anonymity. There's no sources coming out and saying, we gave WikiLeaks all this information about Donald Trump or President Xi or Vladimir Putin, and you know what? They didn't publish it.
I know you.
No one has come out and said that. If they did, that would hurt our reputation for trust for our sources. There was a serious attempt to distract from the content of our publications with this Russian narrative. Now, our sources are interested in two things. They're interested in protecting their identity, but also not going through all that effort and risk to themselves only to have the publication undermined.
The FBI, Department of Homeland Security, this goes to the 29th of December this past year, released a joint report. I'm sure you've read it.
I have read it in detail.
At this point, okay. Supposedly they give technical details regarding tools and some of the infrastructure of the Russian civilian and military intelligence, but they don't give any proof positive.
They give a five-page description of some of the tools that they allege that the Russian state uses. The rest is just fairly boring security recommendations. On the top, there is a disclaimer saying nothing.
I was going to ask you about that.
Guarantee that any of this information is accurate. This is a bad report, and you look in the rest of the computer security community, you'll see dozens of other computer security experts in the United States, absolutely not affiliated with Russia.
Isn't it contradicted though by our own Director of Intelligence, National Intelligence?
James Clapper.
That's James Clapper.
There's nothing in that report that says that any information was given to us. Nothing. We either have a deliberate attempt to mislead or thoroughly incompetent work.
But there's another side of this which is, I think, pretty fascinating, and that is that Hillary Rodham Clinton had a private server at a mom-and-pop shop in a bathroom closet that I would argue, and other lawyers would make arguments that it was illegal for her to have. From what we understand, the Podesta emails were hacked through a phishing scheme where it said, click on this, give us your information, and he did so. So we made it.
Well, there's a number of hacks of the DNC and Podesta based on the publicly available information. This is not something coming from our sources. We published, as part of our policy of full disclosure, not interfering with the material, we published the several Podesta emails, which shows Podesta responding to a phishing email. Now, how did they respond? Podesta gave out that his password was the word password. His own staff said, this email that you've received, this is totally legitimate. So this is something a 14-year-old kid could have hacked.
So my question to you then is, now knowing what WikiLeaks revealed about the Podesta emails, on Clinton corruption, on pay-to-play, on Bernie Sanders being cheated, all of this is revealed. Not a lot of it was covered. So what does that say to the American people about media coverage in America? Dishonest?
It's very dishonest. Corrupt is interesting. It depends on your definition. If you look at what we published in the Podesta emails,
if they're colluding with Hillary, that's not corrupt.
It's ethical corruption.
They're not identifying it to their audiences. They claim that they're objective journalists.
It's ethically corrupt. Corrupt by corruption also means something in law, which is that you're taking money in exchange.
Okay.
So I don't think that
collusion.
They're colluding, yeah.
Okay, because they share her political agenda. Well, why else would they collude? Or they hate Donald Trump?
I think that's an optimistic interpretation, that they share the political agenda.
Well, explain that.
It's more like, you rub my back, I'll rub yours. I'll give you, I'll give you information. You'll come to my. I'll invite you to my child's christening or our next big party, or do you know what I mean? We go to school
or a state dinner.
Yeah. So I think it's more. Sadly, I think it's along those lines.
But I look at this list of what WikiLeaks exposed.
Can I just go back to this media question? What is the line now in the New York Times, MSNBC? Okay. The line is that WikiLeaks changed the result of the election. Okay. And as editor of WikiLeaks, we're quite happy to have the credit for exposing the corruption and behavior that was occurring in that Clinton team. And the DNC fixing things in relation to Bernie Sanders, we're quite happy to accept that.
Was that your motivation? Was your motivation to influence the election? Or is your motivation, what is your motivation? Is it fidelity to truth?
My motivation for maybe 20 years, but 10 years with WikiLeaks, has been to publish true information that is otherwise unsayable. So we're not in competition, if you like.
You have no political agenda?
That is a political agenda. We have
expose the government corruption?
It's not a party political agenda. It's a philosophical agenda. We believe that the best type of government comes from a government that is scrutinized by the people when they have true information about how government and major corporations, other power actors in society actually behave.
Let me ask this.
Does intelligence exist that can definitively answer the following question, whether there were improper contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian officials?
We did not include any evidence in our report, and I say our, that's NSA, FBI, and CIA with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had anything, that had any reflection of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that included in our report.
I understand that, but does it exist?
Not to my knowledge.